Portuguese is the official language of Brazil, and is spoken by more than 99% of the population. Minority languages include indigenous languages, and languages of more recent European and Asian immigrants. The population speaks or signs approximately 210 languages, of which 180 are indigenous. Less than 40,000 people actually speak any one of the indigenous languages in the Brazilian territory. Language is one of the strongest elements of Brazil's national unity. The only non-Portuguese speakers are members of Amerindian groups, and pockets of immigrants who maintain the heritage languages. Within Brazil, there is no major dialect variation of the Portuguese, only moderate regional variation in accent, vocabulary, and use of personal nouns, pronouns, and verb conjugations. Variations are diminishing as a result of mass media, especially national television networks that are viewed by the majority of Brazilians. A written language, which is uniform across Brazil, follows national rules of spelling and accentuation that are revised from time to time for simplification. With the implementation of the Orthographic Agreement of 1990, the orthographic norms of Brazil and Portugal were made virtually identical, with some minor differences. Brazil enacted these changes in 2009, and Portugal enacted them in 2012. Written Brazilian Portuguese differs significantly from the spoken language, with only an educated subsection of the population adhering to prescriptive norms. The rules of grammar are complex and allow more flexibility than English or Spanish. Many foreigners who speak Portuguese fluently have difficulty writing it properly. Because of Brazil's size, self-sufficiency, and relative isolation, foreign languages are not widely spoken. English is often studied in school and is increasingly studied in private courses. It has replaced French as the principal second language among educated people. Spanish is mutually intelligible with Portuguese to a certain degree, allowing Brazilians to considerably understand written and spoken Spanish without prior study, but finding difficulty in oral communication. While Spanish speakers usually have difficulty to understand spoken Portuguese. In 2002, Brazilian Sign Language was made the official language of the Brazilian deaf community. Overview. Before the first Portuguese arrived in 1500, what is now Brazil was inhabited by several Amerindian peoples who spoke different languages. According to Arian Dalania Rodrigues, there were 6 million Indians in Brazil speaking 1,000 different languages. When the Portuguese settlers arrived, they encountered the Tupi people, who dominated most of the Brazilian coast and spoke a set of closely related languages. The Tupi called the non-Tupi peoples Tapuias, a designation that the Portuguese adopted. However, there was little unity among the diverse Tapuia tribes other than the not being Tupi. In the first 2 centuries of colonization, a language based on Tupian languages was widely spoken in the colony, not only by the Amerindians, but also by the Portuguese settlers, Africans and the descendants. This language was spoken in a vast area from São Paulo to Maranhão as an informal language for domestic use, while Portuguese was the language used for public purposes. Língua geral was spread by the Jesuit missionaries and bandeirantes to other areas of Brazil where the Tupi language was not spoken. Then, until the 1940s, this language based on Tupi was widely spoken in some northern Amazonian areas where the Tupi people were not present. In 1775, Marques de Pombal prohibited the use of língua geral or any other indigenous language in Brazil. However, before that prohibition, the Portuguese language was dominant in Brazil. Most of the other Amerindian languages gradually disappeared as the populations that spoke them were integrated or decimated when the Portuguese-speaking population expanded to most of Brazil. The several African languages spoken in Brazil also disappeared. Since the 20th century, there are no more records of speakers of African languages in the country. However, in some isolated communities settled by escaped slaves, the Portuguese language spoken by its inhabitants still preserves some lexicon of African origin, which is not understood by other Brazilians. Due to the contact with several Amerindian and African languages, the Portuguese spoken in Brazil absorbed many influences from these languages, which led to a notable differentiation from the Portuguese spoken in Portugal. Starting in the early 19th century, Brazil started to receive substantial immigration of non-Portuguese-speaking people from Europe and Asia. Most immigrants, particularly Italians and Spaniards, adopted the Portuguese language after a few generations. Other immigrants, particularly Germans, Japanese and Ukrainians, preserved the languages for more generations. German-speaking immigrants started arriving in 1824. They came not only from Germany, but also from other countries that had a substantial German-speaking population. During over 100 years of continuous emigration, it is estimated that some 300,000 German-speaking immigrants settled in Brazil. Italian immigration started in 1875 and about 1.5 million Italians immigrated to Brazil until World War II. They spoke several dialects from Italy. Other sources of immigration to Brazil included Spaniards, Poles, Ukrainians, Japanese and Middle Easterns, with the notable exception of the Germans, who preserved the language for several generations, and in some degree the Japanese, Ukrainians and Italians. Most of the immigrants in Brazil adopted Portuguese as the mother tongue after a few generations. Portuguese is the official language of Brazil, and is the only language used in schools, newspapers, radio and TV. It is used for all business and administrative purposes. Brazil is the only Portuguese-speaking nation in the Americas, giving it a national culture sharply distinct from its Spanish-speaking neighbors, and also being a major factor contributing to the differentiation between Brazilians and people from the rest of South America. Brazilian Portuguese has had its own development influenced by the Amerindian and African languages. Due to this, the language is somewhat different from that spoken in Portugal and other Portuguese-speaking countries, mainly due to phonological differences of similar importance to the differences between British English and American English. During the 18th century, other differences between the Brazilian and European Portuguese developed, mainly through the introduction of lexicon from African and Tupi languages, such as words related to fauna and flora. At the time, Brazilian Portuguese failed to adopt linguistic changes taking place in Portugal produced by French influence. The Brazilian Portuguese remained loyal to the pronunciation used at the time of its discovery. However, when Dom João, the Portuguese king, and the royal entourage took refuge in Brazil in 1808, he influenced the Portuguese spoken in the cities, making it more similar to the Portuguese of Portugal. After Brazilian independence in 1822, Brazilian Portuguese became influenced by Europeans who had migrated to the country. This is the reason that, in those areas, one finds variations in pronunciation and a few superficial lexical changes. These changes reflect the linguistics of the nationalities settling in each area. In the 20th century, the divide between the Portuguese and Brazilian variants of Portuguese widened as the result of new words for technological innovations. This happened because Portuguese lacked a uniform procedure for adopting such words. Certain words took different forms in different countries. For example, in Portugal one hears comboio, and in Brazil one hears trem, both meaning train. Autocarro in Portugal is the same thing as ônibus in Brazil, both meaning bus. minority languages. Despite the fact that Portuguese is the official language of Brazil and the vast majority of Brazilians speak only Portuguese, there are several other languages spoken in the country. According to the president of IBGE, there are an estimated 210 languages spoken in Brazil. 80 are Amerindian languages, while the others are languages brought by immigrants. The 1950 census was the last one to ask Brazilians which language they speak at home. Since then, the census does not ask about language. However, the census of 2010 will ask respondents which languages they speak, allowing a better analysis of the languages spoken in Brazil. At least one of the indigenous languages, named Atu, became an official language alongside Portuguese in the municipality of São Gabriel da Cachoeira. Immigrant languages. European immigrant languages. According to the 1940 census, after Portuguese, German was the most widely spoken language in Brazil. Although the Italian immigration to Brazil was much more significant than the German one, the German language had many more speakers than the Italian one, according to the census. The census revealed that 2/3 of the children of German immigrants spoke German at home. In comparison, half of the children of Italians spoke Portuguese at home. The stronger preservation of the German language when compared to the Italian one has many factors. Italian is closer to Portuguese than German, leading to a faster assimilation of the Italian speakers. Also, the German immigrants used to educate the children in German schools. The Italians, on the other hand, had less organized ethnic schools and the cultural formation was centered in church, not in schools. Most of the children of Italians went to public schools, where Portuguese was spoken. Until World War II, some 1.5 million Italians had immigrated to Brazil, compared to only 250,000 Germans. However, the 1940 census revealed that German was spoken as a home language by 644,458 people, compared to only 458,054 speakers of Italian. Spaniards, who formed the third largest immigrant group in Brazil, were also quickly assimilated into the Portuguese-speaking majority. Spanish is similar to Portuguese, which led to a fast assimilation. Moreover, many of the Spanish immigrants were from Galicia, where the dominant language was not Spanish, but Galician, which is even closer to Portuguese, sometimes even being considered two dialects of the same language. Despite the large influx of Spanish immigrants to Brazil from 1880 to 1930, the census of 1940 revealed that only 74,000 people spoke Spanish in Brazil. Other languages such as Polish and Ukrainian, along with German and Italian, are spoken in rural areas of southern Brazil by small communities of descendants of immigrants who are for the most part bilingual. There are whole regions in southern Brazil where people speak both Portuguese and one or more of these languages. For example, it is reported that more than 90% of the residents of the small city of Presidente Lucena, located in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, speak Rio Grandense Hunsrückisch, a Brazilian form of the Hunsrückisch dialect of German. Some immigrant communities in southern Brazil, chiefly the German and the Italian ones, have lasted long enough to develop distinctive dialects from their original European sources. For example, Brazilian German, also known as Rio Grandense Hunsrückisch. In the Serra Gaúcha region, we can find Italian dialects such as Italian or Italiano Rio Grandense, based on the Venetian language. Other German dialects were transplanted to this part of Brazil. For example, the Austrian dialect spoken in Dresden-Lindener Trees Tilliers in the state of Santa Catarina, or the dialect Schwäbisch, from Donauschwaben immigrants, is spoken in Entre Rios, Garipuava, in the state of Paraná, or the Pomeranian dialect spoken in many different parts of southern Brazil. Plautdiech is spoken by the descendants of Russian Mennonites. However, these languages have been rapidly replaced by Portuguese in the last few decades, partly due to a government decision to integrate immigrant populations. Today, states like Rio Grande do Sul are trying to reverse the trend, and immigrant languages such as German and Italian are being reintroduced into the curriculum again, in communities where they originally thrive. Meanwhile, on the Argentinian and Uruguayan border regions, Brazilian students are being introduced to the Spanish language. Asian languages. In the city of São Paulo, Korean, Chinese and Japanese can be heard in the immigrants' districts, like Libertad. A Japanese-language newspaper, the São Paulo Shinbun, has been published in the city of São Paulo since 1946. There is a significant community of Japanese speakers in São Paulo, Paraná, Mato Grosso do Sul, Pará and Amazonas. Much smaller groups exist in Santa Catarina, Rio Grande do Sul and other parts of Brazil. Many Chinese, especially from Macau, speak a Chinese Creole called Macanese, aside from Hakka, Mandarin and Cantonese. Indigenous languages. Many Amerindian minority languages are spoken throughout Brazil, mostly in northern Brazil. The main indigenous languages are Apalai, Arara, Bororo, Picanela, Karaja, Caribe, Guarani, Kaingam, Nadeb, Nhangatus, Terena, Tucano and Zavante. One of the two Brazilian linguas, Gare, Nhangatus, was until the late 19th century the common language used by a large number of indigenous, European, African, and African descendant peoples throughout the coast of Brazil. It was spoken by the majority of the population in the land. It was prescribed by the Marquis of Pombal for its association with the Jesuit missions. A recent resurgence in popularity of this language occurred, and it is now an official language in the city of São Gabriel da Cachoeira. Today, in the Amazon basin, political campaigning is still printed in this Tupian language. Bilingualism. Nearly 100% of Brazilians have Portuguese as the mother tongue. Spanish is understood to various degrees by most Brazilians due to the similarities of the languages. However, it is hardly spoken well by individuals who have not taken specific education in the language. Due to the substantial differences in phonology between the two languages, in some parts of Brazil, close to the border of Brazil with Spanish-speaking countries, Brazilians will use a rough mixture of Spanish and Portuguese that is sometimes known as Portunhol to communicate with the neighbors on the other side of the border. However, these Brazilians continue to speak Portuguese at home. In recent years, Spanish has become more popular as a second or third language in Brazil due in large part to the economic advantages that Spanish fluency brings in doing business with other countries in the region. Since 7 of the 10 countries that border Brazil use Spanish as an official language. In São Paulo, the German-Brazilian newspaper Brazil Post has been published for over 50 years. There are many other media organizations throughout the land specializing either in church issues, music, language, etc. The Italian online newspaper L'Arena offers Italian lessons. There are many other non-Portuguese publications, bilingual websites, radio and television programs throughout the country. For example, TV Liga from Blumenau shows German-language programming on the channel on a weekly basis. On the Rio Grande do Sul state, there are several German and Italian colonized cities, communities and groups. Most small cities have German or Italian as the second language. In the capital Porto Alegre, it is easy to find people who speak one of those or both. There are also at least 2 ethnic neighborhoods in the country: Liberdade, bastion of Japanese immigrants, and Bixiga, stronghold of Italian immigrants, both in São Paulo. However, these neighborhoods do not count yet with specific legislation for the protection of Japanese and Italian languages in these sites. Co-official languages in Brazil. In this century has grown a recent trend of co-official languages in cities populated by immigrants or indigenous in the north, both with support from the Ministry of Tourism, as was recently established in Santa Maria de Jetibá, Pomerode and Vila Povo, where German also has co-official status. The first municipality to adopt a co-official language in Brazil was São Gabriel da Cachoeira in 2002. Since then, other municipalities have attempted to adopt their own co-official languages. The states of Santa Catarina and Rio Grande do Sul have Italian officially approved as a heritage language in these states, and Espírito Santo has the Pomeranian language, along with the German language, such as cultural heritage state. Also in production is the documentary video Brasil-Italian, with directed and written by André Constantine and executive producer of the historian Fernando Roveda. The pre-launch occurred on November 18, 2011, the date that marked the start of production of the documentary. Brazilian states with linguistic heritages officially approved statewide: Espírito Santo, Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Catarina. Municipalities that have co-official indigenous languages: Amazonas, São Gabriel da Cachoeira, Mato Grosso do Sul, Itacuru, Paranhus, Tocantins, Tocantinha. Municipalities that have co-official allochthonous languages: municipalities that have co-official Italian language: Rio Grande do Sul, Bento Gonçalves, Serafina Correa. Municipalities that have co-official Pomeranian language: Espírito Santo, Domingos Martins, Laranha da Terra, Pancas, Santa Maria de Jetibá, Vila Povo, Minas Gerais, Itueta, Santa Catarina, Pomerode, Rio Grande do Sul, Canguaçu, Rondônia, Espigão d'Este. Municipalities that have co-official language: Rio Grandense, Hunsrückisch language, Santa Catarina, Antonio Carlos, Três Ilhas, Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Maria de Herval. Municipalities in which the teaching of the German language is mandatory: Rio Grande do Sul, Nova Petrópolis. Municipalities in which the teaching of the Italian language is mandatory: Espírito Santo, Venda Nova do Imigrante, Paraná, Francisco Beltrão, Rio Grande do Sul, Antonio Prado, Santa Catarina, Brusque, Criciúma,